Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. As many of our listeners know, I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator, investing in entrepreneurs building in Web3 and enabling the next wave of growth in the decentralized internet and in tokenized economies. Applications are now open for our spring 2025 class, so check out techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. René Pinnell is the founder of Artizen, a match funding platform for human creativity. With over 2 decades of experience, René has helped creators raise more than $50 million for groundbreaking projects, including securing the first 7-figure virtual reality film deal at the Sundance Film Festival. As an executive producer, René has worked on acclaimed projects like BATTLESCAR, starring Rosario Dawson, and Spheres, featuring Jessica Chastain, Millie Bobby Brown, and Patti Smith. Additionally, René has directed the feature documentary The King of Texas, sold a TV pilot to MTV, and founded 2 companies, reflecting his deep commitment to supporting and elevating creative talent. In this episode, René and I riff on his creative heritage and journey as a creator, the birth of the Artizen platform, helping mission-driven brands 10x growth for their ecosystems by funding breakthroughs in human creativity in art, science, and technology, the challenges with funding creative projects, the power of communities and grassroots funding, Artizen's own ecosystem growth and scaling, building moats in a changing landscape, and the duality of being a creator and founder. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. So listen, René, I found your version of the Wayback Machine, right? I didn't have to look that hard though. It was kind of right there when you Google René Pinnell. And knowing you as I know you now, and knowing that you have this creative background, but not to the extent that I found when I looked at the Wayback Machine, I just found this all to be so extraordinary. And the overlaps, interconnections between you and me, I didn't even know existed before we met. Now, I watched the trailer for Spheres, for Vestige. I briefly checked out Terminal 3 by Asid Malik, and I know him. I interviewed him for episode 230 of this podcast.
No kidding. I had no idea.
I did. And
Asid's a good friend.
Yeah, he's a really good guy. Brilliant. And the podcast from last week with Luis Ramirez from Mawari, what he's building is going to make Asad's Jadoo game even better than it is right now. So, and this is just some of your more recent productions, right?
I've been making stuff for a very long time.
I know.
And the Wayback Machine that you're referring to is a website I put together over a decade ago that in painstaking detail chronicled everything I created or made since I was about 8 years old. And I would say the fat majority of it is horrendously embarrassing, but there's something about it that I felt compelled to document because it's all part of your story. It's all what takes you to get to where you are now.
It is. It's your own time capsule. And you can bury it or you can leave it up there for the whole world to discover, right? So you left it up there, which is wonderful. So with all of this, just wrap it all up for me, right? I know of your family's heritage as creators. You've told me that story before, but your own journey as a filmmaker and producer alongside your family's heritage, obviously, and how this all influenced your vision for Artizen. Can you dig into that for me a bit?
Yeah, happy to. So I often start talking about Artizen, which is the match funding platform that I've spent the last many years building. I often start by talking about my family because I come from what I've discovered is kind of an unusual family in that almost everyone is an artist of one kind or another. My mom's an amazing jazz singer. My dad is a novelist and composer. My other dad, my stepdad, is also a composer, worked with Robert Rodriguez and did a bunch of video games in the 90s. My uncle Paul was a sax player who traveled around the world with Leonard Cohen. My other uncle Eagle was an amazing filmmaker in the 70s who made 2 really outstanding movies. One was called The Whole Shooting Match that played at the what used to be called the U.S. Festival, which was in Utah. And Robert Redford saw that movie in like 79 and often cites it as the inspiration for buying that festival and turning it into Sundance. He wanted a festival that could support what was called regional filmmaking at the time. And then my, grandmother was in the movies, and my grandfather had a jazz band, and my great-grandfather was a vaudevillian acrobat who performed with the Marx Brothers and Bob Hope and Blackstone the Magician. And growing up in a family like this, It taught me firsthand the beauty and joy that creativity can bring into the world. But it also taught me how difficult it is to be a creator. Almost everybody in my family struggles financially. And almost all the people that they have in their social circle who are also artists struggle financially. It's kind of like taking a vow of poverty. I grew up with that as the backdrop, and I was an artist myself. I fell in love with filmmaking. I went to school for film. I did it professionally for a decade. And I just got more and more convinced that the way people fund creative projects is deeply broken. And the more I fell into a producer role in the film industry, the more my job became just raising money for creators, the more different funding schemes I explored, whether that was tax incentives or distribution deals or co-productions with other studios in countries that have robust public funding, whether that was grants. I realized that they were all broken in different but related ways, namely highly biased, generally a small group of people making a lot of decisions about which projects to fund and which ones not, super opaque, no transparency or visibility into how decisions were made, most people excluded from the process, a tremendous amount of waste, especially in the grant world. Like most of the money does not go to creators. Most of it gets eaten up in administrative cost. It's just really complex, painfully complex for everybody involved, both the people who are making funding decisions as well as the people trying to navigate it. And so I just became obsessed with this idea that there has to be a better way to raise money for artists. And the deeper I went, the more I realized that it's not just artists, it's really scientists too. It's really coders, it's entrepreneurs, it's anybody that's creating something new in the world that didn't exist before. Some of these industries, it's more broken than others, but they're all really inefficient. And yeah, just obsessed with this idea that there has to be a better way. And that's kind of been the journey that I've been on for 25 years now.
Wow. And I'm thinking that when you build up this knowledge and you build up this itch to do something, that it's something that does build up over years. And it's the experience that you have while you're trying to figure that out that prepares you to do this, and that moving slow to then go fast. And that I love that expression. And there's so many different ways that you can paint that picture, from to being an athlete, to being a founder, to being a Navy SEAL. All this time that you spent leading up to you deciding to go ahead with Artizen, you had probably 2018. That's where I noticed, at least on IMDb, your last grouping really of creative productions that you led, that you were part of. Can you tell me, what is it exactly that you were doing when you decided to build Artizen?
Oh, man. Well, yeah, it's so interesting. There's different moments where you could jump into the story. In 2019, 2020, 2021, sort of that time frame, on paper, that's when Artizen really started. Formally, it was incorporated in February of 2021, but it came out of some experiments I was running at my last startup, which was called Kaleidoscope. And that company it was a funny company. I started it in 2014 when VR first came onto the scene. And my theory when I started that company was that virtual reality was a new artistic medium. And that when you have a new industry form like that, it's more open to new ways of doing business. So if my goal is to reinvent how creative projects are funded, experimenting in an industry that was so nascent would be a good idea. So all I did was I was like, well, let's just start funding projects in the VR space. And let's do that until I discover something, hopefully, that's scalable, something that can have an outsized impact. So essentially what Kaleidoscope was a really funny thing. The very first thing we did was we rented a U-Haul van, and we got Samsung to lend us like $100,000 worth of equipment. I never gave it back, by the way. Sorry, Samsung.
Good.
We did a tour of North America in this sort of traveling film festival where we'd rent a cheap venue, we'd set up a bunch of chairs, and I curated what I considered to be the best like 30 or so projects that were in this most recent wave of VR that came out of Oculus being formed and then Facebook purchasing it, and then people like Samsung coming in with the Gear VR headset. There's this first crop of projects that were really promising. They're all short, couple minutes long. Hey, we toured the United States and Canada just in a U-Haul. It was super punk rock, but it caught the eye of Wired magazine. and they partnered with us to do a world tour. So we scaled it up, put another couple of zeros on the end of our budget, and we toured all through Europe and Asia. And in this process, we met hundreds and hundreds of creators who were trying to raise money for their projects in VR. And we said, well, let's start an accelerator program. Let's take the best of these and let's run them through the paces, try to get their projects in a fundable shape. And then let's hold something that looks like a demo day where we get them to present on stage and we invite all the people who are funding these projects from the obvious FANG players, Facebook and AMD and Samsung, and different companies would come and go in terms of having budgets to spend on this stuff. We'd invite them, and the projects that ended up raising money, we'd produce. And those are the projects that you referenced. So really proud of the work that we did in the VR and augmented reality space. Assad's project, who you mentioned earlier, we funded his very first project, which was called Terminal 3, premiered at Tribeca. And a lot of really great artists we worked with. We worked with Darren Aronofsky to produce Spheres, which is this 3-part series about space. And it had beautiful voiceover from Jessica Chastain and Patti Smith, original music by the folks who did the theme song and the music for Stranger Things. Another project that we did back then was called BATTLESCAR, which premiered at Sundance, and I think is still the best VR narrative project out there. It's an amazing, like 40-minute animated piece about 2 runaway girls who start a punk rock band in New York in the 70s. And it's really good. It's really, really good. So we produced all these projects, but it was totally not scalable, right? Like it was, as you run an accelerator. It's very bespoke. You spend a tremendous amount of time making decisions about which projects you think are good. And then you spend a lot of time with the creators. And we knew it wasn't scalable, but we wanted to just keep funding things however we could and just go through the paces over and over again until we got some insight. And the insight did come accidentally. We started a grant program at Kaleidoscope, and it was a small grant. It was like $5,000 a month. And we were looking at it just as a top of funnel for our accelerator program, where we'd use it to discover new creators who could go through the accelerator. VR is a very expensive medium. Most projects were in sort of like the $200,000 range to $2 million range that we'd fund. So a $5,000 grant seemed like nothing, but a couple of interesting things happened. One is that it actually attracted a tremendous number of submissions. And a lot of those submissions were actually from pretty established people. And so that taught us that like $5,000, $10,000 grant can actually be a significant amount of money for a creator to go experiment with some new idea, even if they're fairly far along in their careers. And the other thing that it taught me is that curation, it just does not scale. I spent an entire month basically doing nothing other than looking through the hundreds of submissions that we got. And that kicked off this year-long exploration of like, okay, this grant program is good for us. Let's keep doing it. Clearly, I don't have the time to curate it. Let's get our community, we had all these great creators in our community. Let's get them to do the hard work of picking the winners. And so we just started like nights and weekends hacking together different ways to allow all the different stakeholders in our community. Often they were in a sort of competitive stance to each other because some of them would be competing for the same grant. How do you get all these different voices to be balanced and to have the end result be high quality projects that are selected, and for everybody to feel like the system was fair, even if they didn't win the grant? And yeah, we did that for about a year. And then we had something unexpected happen. We partnered with Viola Davis, who's this amazing Academy Award-winning actress. We had done a project with her, and this was the summer of 2020. BLM was happening, and they wanted to do a grant that would support Black artists working in immersive media. We launched a grant with them with all these tools that we'd built around community curation, and it went viral. The grant raised over $100,000 in a couple of months. And that was the first moment where I was like, oh, I think we might have found the thing we've been looking for. This is the thing. Let's make this the thing. Let's figure out how do we scale up this idea of allowing people to pool their money and then collectively decide how to allocate that money to the most worthy projects. And so fast forward another year, we relaunched as Artizen. And so that's sort of the transition from my last company to Artizen and how we made that leap.
Was there any kind of line in the sand? Was it, all right, we're going to stop with Kaleidoscope and we're going to move ahead with Artizen? Did you have to step back and really decide how you're going to structure this, or was it just a natural continuation?
No, it was a clean break. I mean, the business was bootstrapped largely, Kaleidoscope. It was profitable, but running an accelerator program, doesn't make you much money, especially, I mean, like, at least the kind of accelerator that you run, you have the chance of having upside because you're investing in startups. But we were investing in weird art projects that would do like the festival circuit, but none of them had really any chance of making money. So we'd take a 10% producer fee, and we would organize a lot of events. Like we ran the immersive component of the Tribeca Festival and the Cannes Festival. Those are low margin businesses. So for us, it was a pretty easy, like basically we were treading water with the last company looking for the thing. And so when we found the thing, it was like, okay, let's just spin that down and then put everything into the Artisan basket, put all our eggs in that basket, because that was clearly the thing that could scale.
Was it easy to get people to jump on board with you with that natural continuation?
At first, and then a hard no. So the yes at first was that we'd actually spent a lot of money in 2017 and 2018. This was like right after CryptoKitties had come out. And I've been in the crypto space for a long time because my best friend growing up from childhood created the Silk Road and serving a double life sentence. I was exposed to crypto in 2009 for the first time.
I saw Ross Ulbricht pop up somewhere in your history.
Yeah, we grew up together and we were roommates in San Francisco the year of his arrest. And yeah, he's been my best friend, one of about 3 best friends that I have since middle school. And so I've been exposed to crypto for a long time. And I was fascinated when NFTs came out and CryptoKitties had caught my imagination. We had taken a run at building something, using NFTs as the funding mechanism for projects. In 2017, 2018, we'd spent over $100,000 on legal fees, basically getting to the conclusion that there was zero regulatory clarity. And we also made the assessment that it was not consumer ready. And we didn't think that our community that we'd been building with Kaleidoscope would go down that journey. It just felt like oil on water. It was too large a leap for most people back then. And so when we stood up Artisan as a standalone product, we had made the decision to be a Web 2.5 sort of company, that we'd start with building this mechanism out all in Web 2 architecture, and then we would slowly migrate into crypto. We launched Artisan as a standalone product built on top of Stripe in February of 2021. And we had an amazing month of growth. I was filled with so much joy after toiling away for a tremendous amount of time building it and experimenting and failing. And then after that very first month, Stripe canceled our account. They deplatformed us.
Yep.
And it was just an automated thing. Nobody had looked. We'd had a spike in chargebacks, and we got an email saying that they looked at our business. It's crowdfunding, which is a high risk category for them, and that they just had made the decision in some automated way that our business was too small and too high risk for them to mess with. And so we were faced with a very hard decision of, do we build this out with another payment processor, or maybe now is the time that we take the leap into crypto? And we decided we're going to go all in on crypto. That's when we raised a round of funding and spent a long time, too long, rebuilding everything on crypto rails. I learned a lot in that process. It took too long to launch. It was too expensive, but we got there. And that's where we are now, which is that most of the infrastructure for Artisan is all built on crypto rails now, even though we've ironically gone back to Stripe to handle credit card processing. They're a great company. It's a great product. And thankfully, because of you and because of Techstars, we got connected to the right people at Stripe who looked at our business in depth and reassessed how much of a risk it was. And now we feel very good about that partnership. I try not to hold a grudge, and I understand that they are big and we were just a tiny minnow. So I don't hold it against them.
I hear you. Wrapping this around Artisan as a platform, right? And how it works. And you talked a little bit about one side of this dual-sided problem that you're solving, which is that creators are massively underfunded historically and systematically underfunded. And you found an interesting niche to pursue as the other side of the two-sided problem, that big brands, like you mentioned, and you've got some experience with them, they're burning marketing budgets to build their ecosystems. So can you talk about what Artisan is and how it works in the context of solving these two problems at the same time?
Yeah, so we think of Artisan, for better or worse, as like a triple-sided marketplace. We've got creators and brands, and then the fans of the creators. Those are sort of like the 3 main stakeholders that have to come together. And we learned at our last startup, Kaleidoscope, We ran this accelerator program. Most of the money came from big brands who were wanting to fund innovative projects, generally almost always using their technology, their products, their tools, their platforms. They wanted to fund projects that would help them grow their ecosystem. So Oculus, Facebook, Meta, like that was a really obvious one. They were building the hardware, they're building the software stack. They wanted and needed to fund a ton of projects to be created to help build out that ecosystem. But we realized that most companies, especially tech companies that are building products and services, they need creators to use those tools to create content. If it's a platform like Unity Technologies, it's a video game engine. They need developers and creators to be building games and experiences using their tech stack, or else they don't have a business. And right now, these companies spend that money on things like events. They spend money on hackathons. They spend money on grant programs, on awards, on general marketing initiatives, all in the effort to attract the best entrepreneurs, the best developers, and the best creators to build for their ecosystems. And right now, we see that money getting wasted a lot of the time. It's events, they might generate buzz, but rarely do they generate lasting impact. Grant programs and accelerators and awards, they definitely can work, but they take a lot of time and energy to run well. And if you don't run them well, they'll attract B players and mediocre talent. And even if you do run them well, they're very hard to scale up. They sort of have a ceiling for how big you can grow them. And so at Artizen, what we do is we say, rather than waste a lot of that money and get sort of mixed results, you should launch a match fund with Artizen. And so you put in $100,000 into a match fund to support the types of creators and projects that you think will grow your ecosystem. And you get to spell out explicitly what eligibility requirements projects must meet. Typically, it's you have to build with our tool set, and then projects submit to these match funds. And rather than have the brand have to do the heavy lift of reviewing all those projects, that's where our community curation comes in, where all the different stakeholders get a voice. They're not all equally loud. Some people have louder voices if they've contributed to the platform in a positive way in the past. There's a whole lot of different ways that we use, or a lot of different ways that we judge how much voting power a particular person should have, but everyone gets a say. And the best projects bubble to the top, and all the brand has to do is approve them and say, yes, this does meet our eligibility requirements. They don't have to make that hard assessment of, is this a good project or is it a bad project? The community gets to do that. It's a win-win-win. It's a win for the brand because they get to deploy capital and have a high degree of confidence that money is going to fund the best projects. Because we use match funding, these projects are also raising capital from other match funds that they also qualify, and they're also raising money from their fans. So the total amount of money flowing to a brand's ecosystem can be dramatically larger than the money that they've put up. We've had match funds where somebody will launch a match fund with $10,000, but qualifying projects will raise like $370,000, so 37x what they contributed. So it's a pretty good result for brands. It's a great result for creators. Obviously, they need funding. And it's a great result for fans because what they care about is seeing new work from the creators that they love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love using the platform as well. And I've played around with it quite a bit. And it's addictive in that you get to see all these fantastic creative projects and start to look at the ones that just intrigue your curiosity the most. And maybe it's something that you're interested in as culture, as cool technology, as just something incredibly unique about the environment. And I absolutely loved it. And I can plan to continue to keep using it, but I am just one individual here, right? And that you are connecting the dots here for creators, brands, and then the fans of the creators and people like me who may not have been fans of those individual creators to begin with, but I'm just intrigued by the platform. And then you've created some fans out of just being out there and doing this and adding to the appreciation of creators out there in the world. Your whole job of going out and getting the brands in, your whole job of going out and getting the creators, I feel like, René, it is one of your sweet spots here because of your history in this space with creators and with the brands. Like, how fast can this move with you starting to scale this?
On the launching new match funds and landing brands to either create their own match fund or sponsor existing match funds, I think one side of that looks a lot like enterprise sales. So that's us going to the really big, obvious companies like Google and Microsoft and Meta, and getting them to launch match funds that are very branded, that are directly driving their bottom line. So that's one side of the business. And I think we can grow that size of the business pretty big. If we keep at our current pace, I think that side of the business will be at about 100 million in the next 4 years. The other side is the bottoms up approach. And that's where probably in spring of next year, we'll launch this ability. Like right now, if we have to partner with a brand and we launch the match fund ourselves. But starting in maybe the next 6 months, we'll allow anyone to create a match fund on any topic that they're passionate about. And this is, I think, going to be ultimately the larger side of the business, because there's so many interesting niches and curatorial boxes that people can draw around the type of creativity that they want to see more of in the world. Whether it's something really small and specific, like I want to start a match fund to support neighborhood beautification in Portland, where I live. Or it's something like I want to create a match fund to support decentralized AI, because I think it's super important. Creating match funds around these areas of interest will allow people who share that interest with you to pool your capital together to create these match funds that I think will be quite large. And that's what we saw with the Black Realities grant we did that sort of kicked all of this off in 2020. We didn't have that insight. A person in our community came to us and said, I think you should do a match fund around this topic. It's important to me. It's important to my community. I think Black artists working in immersive media need more support. That topic resonated with Viola Davis, who's got like 10 million followers on social media, and that pulled in hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital. And I think that model, will come sometime next year on Artisan. And I think that's ultimately going to be the bigger side of the business.
Yeah, I hear you. And that, that grassroots side of it is, I think from a human nature perspective, is obviously I want to see both sides of the scale, right? As an investor in Artisan. But the true nature of the whole spirit of getting this started was at the grassroots level. Such wonderful opportunities to fund creators through Artisan. I know that you're embarking on a fundraising round now, René. How would you like this to all play out?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're raising a round of funding, our seed round now. For me, I try not to do anything. I don't think I can do anything unless I have a fire in my belly. And I wanted to wait to raise a round of funding until I was convinced completely that we had figured out product market fit, that we understood the problems that creators face, that we understood the problems brands face, and understood the problems that fans face well enough to build a product that can bring these three stakeholders together. And I think Artisan as a platform right now, I'd give it like a B+, but I've got a clear line of sight to an A+ version of the product. And we're more than doubling all of our key metrics every season. And I also, for the first time, have a very clear idea of how to get us to the next level of scale. And so what the next year looks like is hopefully complete the fundraise in the next 2 or 3 months. We want to take that sort of accidental thing that happened with Viola Davis, and we want to scale it up. So I've got this bunch of relationships with pretty well-known creators. On a bunch of our projects that we produced, got to know people like Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, or legendary filmmaker Darren Aronofsky, or Terrence Malick, who is one of the best filmmakers ever alive, an amazing human, very kind person. So we want to partner with people like that to launch really high-profile, prestigious match funds that can capture the public's imagination and also give us credibility with major brands. I don't think that scales forever, but I think that gets us to the next level of growth. So the plan is to launch somewhere between 10 and 20 of these really high-profile match funds with people that have very large followings. And that will both attract high-quality projects to submit. It'll make the enterprise sales that we're already doing with large brands much easier. It gives us that credibility and an extra reason for them to deploy their capital through Artisan as opposed to spending it on their own in-house grant program or some glitzy event.
Do you expect that folks like Johnny Greenwood and Darren Aronofsky, that with the relationships that you've built with them, that they would be able to refer projects to you?
Yeah. So most creators who have quote unquote made it, first of all, they haven't really. That's one of the big insights after working in art and entertainment for 20 years, is that even a creator like Terrence Malick still struggles epically to get funding for their work. So it's like, even when you made it, you haven't really made it.
Mm-hmm.
But most of those creators have a great sense of obligation and joy in paying it forward and supporting emerging talent and emerging creators. So it's actually a pretty easy ask to go to someone like Grimes, who's got a huge social media following, and say, hey, let's create a match fund together that will support creators who are maybe like you, but are 15 years earlier in their journey, and help them get the kind of support that they need to survive and to continue making amazing work that changes the world. It's a pretty easy pitch to get those people on board, especially if you can seed those match funds with some capital and really put fuel on the fire by bringing in some big brands that can have 6 and 7 figure brand sponsorships. Whenever I do anything, I try to make it a win-win-win for all the participants. So it's a good play, and one that I'm excited to run because I think it'll work. It's worked in the past. But most importantly, I think it's also what creators need to feel comfortable with this new funding model, because we're essentially asking people to play a new game. I think about game design a lot with Artisan. It's kind of like a new board game that we're asking people to play. And unless you're a hardcore gamer, like learning a new game is always a bit painful. And we try to make it as fun as possible. But to get over that hurdle, I think having people like Patti Smith make a match fund for singer-songwriters or musicians, I think that will give people the motivation and the sense that, oh, okay, this is worth me taking the time to learn a new game.
Yeah, there was a record label over here in Ireland years ago. Not sure if it still exists. It was called Mother Records. And U2 were involved with that. And that they were trying to have this easy space for emerging Irish artists to record music.
Oh, beautiful.
And so we're going to have to, I know where Bono lives. I haven't like lurked outside his house or anything. Or
now you have a reason to lurk out his house.
I do.
Stake it out.
No, it's funny when you drive by, you see people doing that, because our local swimming hole down in Killiney, the beach is, his house overlooks that beach. And so sometimes when we drive different ways to get home, we'll go right by the house. And there's always, people outside with backpacks just looking inside the window, but we'll have to tap him up.
You two would love to launch a match fund on Artisan. I'll come over to Dublin and we can go harass him until he says yes.
Yeah, because he's done plenty of harassing of people to raise money in the past himself. So let's turn the table on Mr. Paul Hewson. Okay, so just kind of thinking a bit more inward, René, that I can't help but think that there is some point of separation between the minds of René the creator, with the love and the joy that you have in filmmaking and creating, and René the founder. Do you have any struggles with this duality, or is this one and the same?
Yeah, what a great question, Pete. I had struggles, and I've resolved most of them. I embarked on this journey, to be honest, the very first time, you can find it on my website too, in the Wayback Machine for René. All the way back in 2007, that was really the beginning of this journey. Until then, I was just hardcore, going to be a filmmaker, going to be a producer. I went to school, did it for a decade. I self-financed a TV pilot that MTV picked up. And they paid me to do a pilot episode. They did not pick it up for a season, but an internet startup run by Kip McClanahan, who's a wonderful human in Austin, Texas, big part of the sort of angel investor VC community now. But he had a startup called On Networks at the time. And this is right when like YouTube was coming out. And their bet was that it wasn't going to be user-generated content. It was going to be sort of prosumer content. So content that kind of looked like it could be on TV, but was done for micro budgets. And so they picked up my comedy show and they bought it over from MTV and paid me to do it for 2 years. And they actually hired me internally to run some of their content development for them. And when I was working there, it was the very first time I was like, oh man, I was in the same gig where I was reviewing tons of projects, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like I don't have enough time, I don't have enough visibility to do as good a job as 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people who could help me with this. And so there's actually a picture on my website, I'll send it to you after this, that diagrams what I was calling at the time U Studio, but it's basically Artisan. I mean, it's basically the same fucking thing I've been doing for 17 years, which is figuring out like, how do you bring people together to fund and curate and support creative projects? That was the beginning of this journey, and I was fueled by basically rage. I was just so angry with how much, there's this Orson Welles quote that sticks in my head. filmmaking is 98% hustle and like 2% art. And I just was fueled by rage at how hard it is to raise money for creative ventures and how that ratio between energy spent trying to shoehorn yourself into whatever shape the funding sources demand you take with actually being creative. And that's what fueled me initially. And so I went to school for design, specifically so I could learn how to build product, because I saw that technology was the biggest lever. And if I really wanted to have an impact, I had to do it through technology. And I loved it and I was interested in it, but I missed just being creative. I missed approaching projects for the joy that you can only get when you're making art. And that was a real challenge. It's difficult to grind for years and years and years and years, just fueled on rage. I think a lot of the struggles I went through with Artisan maybe 2 years ago were with that conflict of trying to be the founder, but when I really thought of myself as an artist. And so I hired 10 people. I hired the VP of design at Facebook to run product for Artisan. I was spending most of my time managing other people, and I was pretty miserable, to be totally honest. I was pretty miserable. And so I got to a breaking point, and I decided that what I needed to do for me to continue spending most waking hours working on Artisan was I needed to get back to a place of joy with it. And for me, the mental unlock was just a reframe, where instead of thinking about it as this startup that I had to go work on, that I'd think about Artisan as an art project, and that it would become my creative outlet. And how can I turn a weekly email that I send to people into something that I look forward to writing because it's a creative process and something that I can have fun with? How can I apply the same creativity that I applied to filmmaking to how I structured the company? So I dramatically restructured it and just sort of threw out a lot of the rules that I felt like I was following because I had to, because that's the shape that startups take, and just started to improvise more and to listen to my intuition more. A lot of people are very like metrics and numbers driven. I think that that's important and it has a role, but I think especially when you're in the wilderness looking for product market fit, I think listening to your gut is actually more valuable. And I think that's something that artists do really good because you don't have metrics to go off of. All you have is your gut. And so, yeah, that's how I resolve that tension is I think of Artisan as one big durational art project and an art project that I can work on for the rest of my life.
Was your desire to just take it upon yourself to re-engineer, rebuild the front end? Was that part of this? Was that part of that feeling?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of things have been happening that's really interesting in product design lately. For me, I think whatever's the most direct line between an idea and execution is the best. And a good example of this is, so Artisan has been built and rebuilt about 5 times from burning the code base down to the ground and rebuilding it. And First, we did it because it was just a side project and we weren't even thinking about how we were building it. It was just a bunch of duct tape together. So we're like, okay, let's burn it down. Let's rebuild it for real. Then it got burned down when Stripe deplatformed us. And we're like, okay, let's rebuild everything for crypto, and hired a big team and built it out. And then I burned it down after that because when you build a product and you've got a couple front-end developers, a couple back-end engineers, a blockchain developer, mathematician doing all your formulas, it becomes so painful to make changes and so slow. And that was a big learning for me, that more people actually makes things go slower, almost always. And so I had discovered this thing about 2 years ago called Bubble, which is a no-code tool. It lets you build apps without any code. And I had hired this kid named Nate Van Cleve. Just met him online. He was working on a side project that was sort of in the public goods funding space. He was tweeting smart things. I reached out. We had a couple of calls. Discovered he was building his own startup by himself with this no-code tool. And I hired him. I decided to hire him to build a small component of Artisan. It was going to be like the voting component of Artisan, because the bigger team that I'd hired were just moving too slow. And I could see that we were never ever going to get to that side of the product in the time frame that I needed. And so he started building that. And I realized like, oh shit, this is really fast. And this is really easy. And most of our infrastructure, the real meat of it is just a smart contract. And so once we had that smart contract established, I was like, why am I spending all this time and money and energy on a very arthritic design and build process in the sort of the traditional framework? Why don't I just rebuild everything in Bubble? And that's basically what we've done. We've completely re-architected all of Artisan's front end using this no-code app that this brilliant young kid who has no formal training helped create. And I am so happy. I'm so happy. That's like one of the best decisions I ever made. I mean, I loved all the people I worked with before, but it's like I can have an idea on Monday and the whole thing can be done on Tuesday. It is at least one order of magnitude faster to develop product and at least one order of magnitude cheaper to develop product. And I see AI as only accelerating that. The way I think about product development now is we're maybe 1 to 2 years away from everyone completely rethinking how they spend capital to build product. And it's going to be something that individuals who understand the big principles behind coding can use to build really amazing things, but they might not need to even know how to code at all. I know how to code a little bit. I'm a very bad coder. I could never build a product the traditional way, but I have enough of the core concepts that I can hack together things with a no-code tool like Bubble that work much better and are shipped much faster than a team of 10 people. And that's just remarkable. And it makes working where it used to be a frustration and a headache and a pain, it makes it a joy.
It feels like I'm bouncing back to what I say to a lot of founders, René, and you might have heard me say this before, but deciding what your moat is. Is your moat going to be a technology moat, or is it going to be a relationship, network, market moat, right?
I feel like when the cost of developing software drops to zero or approaches zero, and everyone who has an idea can go build a thing, I feel like most moats are going to be just network effects. I mean, network effects have always been a really powerful thing, but there's other moats, complicated, hard pieces of software that would take a lot of time and money to build. I think that all goes away. And I think the most defendable moats become the network effects of your community. So for us, in terms of moats, I think about that's probably the most long-term defendable moat, is sort of just the community and the memetics that you build around that community. And the switching cost becomes the thing that keeps people in there, keeps them in your ecosystem.
Yeah.
The other moat is just that like we're building something that's like so weird and new. It's a new game that I think most people will think it's either stupid or they just won't get it until it becomes obvious. And again, I think that's there's other people that I like. Patreon is a great platform for creators to raise money. I am not worried about any of the established players copying anything we do because it's this bizarre collection of different ideas that we've put together in a very unique way to make a brand new game that will seem very foreign to most people, and they won't get it for a long time until it's a big, obvious thing.
Yeah, I worked for the French for a long time in a past life, René, and the usual saying goes is that it works in concept, but not in practice. With the French, it's that it works in practice, but not in concept. And this is very French.
Yeah, it is very French. When you try to describe how Artisan works and you're like, okay, well, you got like 30 minutes. Whenever a creator comes into our platform, the thing that I try to do is just make every next step really obvious and easy. So I don't try to explain all the rules. It's just like, okay, the first step is just publish a project on Artisan. And we make that process really simple. It takes about 10 minutes. We ask very few questions and we make that as streamlined as possible. And the next one is like, okay, well, now you submit to match funds and we try to make that process as easy as possible. The next step is, okay, you've got to get your community to vote for your project. Here's how you do that. We just sort of pull you through the process with just worrying about the next step ahead of you. And then only once you've made it through a whole season, you sort of see how the whole game is played, you kind of get it and it sinks in and it's pretty fun. Most people really like playing the game once they know how it's played.
Oh yeah, very much like Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel LaRusso karate. You've got to paint the fence, you've got to wax on, wax off, you've got to sand the floor, and you don't even know until he starts throwing punches at you that he actually taught you karate. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing.
That's so true. And the end result too is not only making the game fun, but I've tried really hard that all the skills that you need in order to be good on Artisan are generalizable to just raising money for your project anyways. A lot of creative people have this deep-seated mistrust, dislike of the fundraising process. And I think that is the wrong way to approach it. If you are a creative person, whether you're an artist or a coder or a scientist, anybody that needs capital to make your dreams a reality, you have to get good at fundraising. And my job is to build a system that minimizes the amount of effort that takes but it always is going to take effort. And those skills to communicate clearly what your project is about, communicate clearly how it will impact the world, communicate clearly why you are the right person or team to make this thing, how to build a community around your project that wants to support you, how to build momentum. All of these things are things that you need to be good at, even if you're not using Artisan. And so the rules of our game and the steps that we ask you to jump through and the effort that you put into Artisan, it's not random. It's not, we're not coming up with some dumb game that, only works in the case of Artisan. It's all stuff that you're going to need to get good at anyways.
It's amazing that you can transfer all that knowledge and all that experience through your platform to creators.
Yeah, hard earned. It's hard earned.
Definitely. I saw you posted on Twitter yesterday, Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it these days. Filled with optimism today, freaking me out, to be honest. Share more?
Yeah, so I posted that.
You did.
When I had the realization that sort of a lot of the big question marks that have been hanging over my head suddenly started to have answers. So with Artisan, there was a long period of time where I wasn't sure if we would figure out the right blend of features and the right set of rules to make the game fun to play. And I was seeing last week we had one of the best weeks, if not the best week in terms of funding raised. Creators in the course of about 2 weeks raised close to $200,000. That was part of what was making me feel optimistic. The other thing, not to get political, I guess this will come out before the election, but yeah, Ross, best friend, he's in prison for 2 life sentences, 240 years they gave him for creating the Silk Road. And regardless of whether you think the Silk Road is a net positive or net negative, it was a marketplace that existed outside of legal jurisdiction. People would use Bitcoin to buy anything, but it was primarily weed and drugs. The only rule on the platform was that you cannot sell anything that can harm a third person, very much in Ross's libertarian belief set. I feel like the tide has finally turned where I believe we will have a president who is crypto friendly. And at least in the crypto industry, support is overwhelming for Ross. The vast majority of people feel like that sentence, he got more time than El Chapo got. He's one of the most notorious drug lords. And my buddy Ross is an Eagle Scout. He's like the most honorable, kind, caring human in the world, and the last person that is a threat to society. And I was just feeling very optimistic that my friend will not spend the rest of his life in prison. And that was the other part of feeling really optimistic, that Artisan has made it through the wilderness, trying to find product market fit, finding it and seeing it thrive, hopefully in a matter of months, my best friend could be out of prison after being there for 12 years. I was feeling really optimistic about both those things.
Definitely. I've got a friend who lives in Spain now, and he would travel through London City Airport back in the day when I was traveling through London City Airport. And I would always just go walk through the bar at London City Airport whenever I got there, just to see if he was there, just because it would be so nice to see him and say hello. And he was never there. He was never there. Now I don't go to London City Airport that much anymore, and neither does he. Never, pretty much. But we make time to connect in other places. So I hope Ross is freed. Get your pal.
Thank you for saying that, Pete. Awesome. I appreciate it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what the next chapter of his life has in store for all of us. He is the most unusual thinker. Every time I have a conversation with him, he sees the world so uniquely. And we need more people like that in the world who challenge the orthodoxy. And sometimes those thoughts will be crazy and not productive. But without those types of thoughts, we'll never have anything new. And yeah, I'm excited to see whatever he does next. I think it's going to be quite interesting.
Absolutely. And likewise, that's why I never try to steer you towards the orthodoxy. And we just need to let this creative spirit go and live and have whatever has driven you to this point. Well, no, we know now what's driven you to this point, but have that keep driving you.
Thank you, Pete.
Last question, René, and this is a question I ask everybody on this podcast. What is one thing that people would not expect to know about you?
Oh, man. Who would they not expect to know about me? Every night, listening to a history podcast.
Ooh.
I have found it to be the most soothing thing. The best way to nod off is to learn about the problems of people who have died a long time ago. It puts everything into perspective. It's just the right kind of interesting where you stop thinking about your own problems, but not so interesting that you stay awake. I've got a remarkably broad but shallow understanding of history because I've literally every night for about 10 years now, I fall asleep listening to some history podcast. And so it's real spotty too, right? Like I've listened to probably 500 hours of podcasts on the history of Rome. It's like there's lots of gaps because I'll fall asleep right when, I don't know, Caesar is getting stabbed and I'll kind of forget the part, what happens after that. And but that's something people might not know about me.
I've been listening a lot to Founders podcast recently, which is David Senra.
Oh, that's a great one.
Where it's basically a hour-long book report, but fueled by the 40 hours of preparation that he puts in after reading every biography he reads on leaders through history, right? And the thought he shared in one of the last episodes I listened to was that you learn from these people who have been through this. Every problem that you're faced with as a founder, somebody has already solved. And the technology may not have been there 100, 200, 300 years ago in these stories that you're hearing about these leaders through history, these founders through history, entrepreneurs. But when you get down to the very core of the problem and what really is in your way, you figure out that this is just human nature. And you can move those pieces around and you can solve those problems. So go back, listen to how people solve these problems a long time ago, and you'll find
I've listened to all of the Founders episodes on Rockefeller. He's got a bunch of them. What an interesting character.
Totally. All right. Well, listen, René, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for taking the time, Pete.
My pleasure, René.
Yeah, always, man.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to René Pinnell for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. Check out the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie for all the relevant links to learn more about René and Artizen. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. Applications are open now for our spring 2025 class, so check us out on techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie and how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!